Our guest now on Outside the Book is Aram Goudsouzian. He is the chair of the history department at the University of Memphis, and he holds a Ph.D. in history from Purdue University. He's the author of several books on African American history in particular, but his new book is Down to the Crossroads, Civil Rights, Black Power, and the Meredith March Against Fear. Thank you very much for being with us on Outside the Book.
David, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much.
The march is maybe not very well known, certainly not as well known as some others, but it brings together several of the icons of the civil rights era: Martin Luther King, Stokely Carmichael, James Meredith himself. Tell us a little bit about the interplay of these remarkable personalities in this event.
Sure. Well, it's an amazing story. It happens in June of 1966, and it begins with James Meredith, who of course is famous for integrating the University of Mississippi, Ole Miss, 4 years earlier. And Meredith is a sort of singular, very quirky man, and he decides that he's going to lead a walk, really, from Memphis, Tennessee to Jackson, Mississippi, about 220 miles. And along this, he's going to do it to encourage people to register to vote, and he's going to do it to defy the culture of intimidation and fear in Mississippi that's keeping black people from voting. On the second day of his march, he gets shot. And he survives the march. He survives the attack, but once he's attacked, it leads to all the major civil rights organizations coming to Memphis, determined to carry on Meredith's march. So as you say, it collects virtually every important figure in the civil rights movement in 1966 is marching through Mississippi in these 3 weeks in the summer of June of 1966. So it brings together Martin Luther King, who's still an archetype of nonviolence and racial integration, but it also brings Stokely Carmichael and SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which is the most radical of the civil rights groups. And it's on this march that SNCC and Stokely Carmichael are first calling for black power. That's part of what makes the march so famous.
I'm intrigued by the title, Down to the Crossroads. Is that a deliberate reference to Robert Johnson, or is that just a coincidence?
No, it's definitely deliberate. This is, obviously it's a crossroads in the civil rights movement, because with the call for black power, you can see this as the beginning of something with the rise of the Black Power movement, but also in some ways the end of something. It's the last great civil rights march, the last march where you bring together all the major civil rights organizations in this very creative interplay and with very many dramatic moments. But of course it's marching going through Mississippi and going through the Delta, and that's where Robert Johnson's famous Crossroads is, where he made the deal with the devil. So it certainly plays on that, yeah.
The Meredith shooting is a bit mysterious as to the motives of the shooter. Talk a little bit about what you learned about that part of the march.
And that is one of the most fascinating aspects of this whole story, and one that had never really gotten much attention before. So when Meredith was shot, everyone assumed that it was by, a crazy white supremacist, a Klansman, something like that. And that's how sort of the liberal media tagged him, and they figured that this was going to be the spark to another great moment in civil rights history. But then the man himself, his name is Aubrey Norville. He was a man from Memphis, a hardware clerk, no known connection to any white supremacist organization, never really reveals a motive, shot him with a birdshot rather than with a single bullet. So it became an interesting story because no one really knew his motives. So not only did pro-civil rights advocates blame him and try to use him, but also segregationists blamed him. They said, this is a guy, an outsider from Mississippi, who came and he's trying to stir up trouble. The civil rights movement probably paid this guy. This was the argument that white supremacists were making at the time. And they said, oh, he wasn't trying to kill him, he was just trying to wound him with birdshot. Now, birdshot can kill you, of course, but this was the argument they were making.
You had a conversation with James Meredith.
I did.
What did Meredith have to say about this experience, and kind of what was your sense of Meredith as a personality?
I wouldn't say that I necessarily got a lot of direct information about the march from meeting with James Meredith and from interviewing him, but I did get a much better sense of him as a man. His charisma, his uniqueness, sort of what drives him. And in fact, just recently I got this very nice letter from James Meredith. He said, my name has been used in a lot of books. Yours is the first one that really sort of captures me as I see it. And he really gave me, it was really heartwarming praise, because Meredith is a hard character to get a grasp on, and I worked really hard to try to tell his whole story, his whole picture. So I was really warmed in the heart from that letter from Meredith, yeah.
What's the legacy of this march?
This march has a lot of legacies. One is that it helped to register a large number of black voters in Mississippi. Over 4,000 voters registered along the march route in those 3 weeks. More important, probably, it signaled a new direction for a lot of black Mississippians. By joining this march, even if they just walked through town with Martin Luther King and Stokely Carmichael, they were in a lot of ways upsetting the old patterns of the past and challenging the notion of white supremacy. but it has a much larger national and international legacy as well. The call for black power, and the way that would signal a new direction in the civil rights movement, the evolution of Martin Luther King, as he starts to really focus more on issues of poverty and class in his last few years of his life. And also an alienation of the federal government from the civil rights movement. There are many calls for Lyndon Johnson to have federal intervention on the march, federal protection. But in the last year since the Voting Rights Act, he's really drifted away from the movement, become consumed with Vietnam, and obsessed with black radicalism. And so this is one of the more tragic aspects of the story.
Our guest is Aram Goudsouzian, and his book is Down to the Crossroads, Civil Rights, Black Power, and the Meredith March Against Fear. Aram, thank you very much for joining us on Outside the Book.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Sure.